"Sir, your wife didn't jump." The words were so soft they should have disappeared beneath the string quartet, beneath the polite laughter, beneath the silver clink of champagne glasses in the Bellini mansion's grand ballroom. But Adrian Bellini heard them as if the whole room had gone silent. One moment, the most feared man in Boston was standing beneath a chandelier the size of a small car, his white dinner jacket cut sharp across his shoulders, his hand wrapped around a crystal glass, while 200 guests waited for him to toast his new engagement. The next moment, the color drained from his face. The glass in his hand gave a tiny crack, thin as a whisper. Across from him, Clara Johnson lowered her eyes and stepped back with the silver tray balanced against her palm, her dark skin glowing under the warm gold lights, her Black Maid's uniform pressed clean, her expression calm in a room that had spent the entire evening pretending she was not there. Before that sentence, Clara had been nothing to them. A woman to summon with 2 fingers. A name they did not bother to remember. The help. The girl with the wine. The maid who knew when to lower her gaze and vanish into corners lined with marble and money. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and if you believe dignity still matters in a world that forgets it too easily, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to Clara Johnson, who had not come to the Bellini estate to be seen. She had come to find the truth. The engagement party had begun at 7 sharp, with black cars curling around the circular driveway like shadows in polished steel. Women in silk gowns stepped onto the white stone steps. Men in tuxedos adjusted cuff links worth more than Clara made in 6 months. Inside, the ballroom smelled of roses, old wood, expensive perfume, and the kind of power that never had to raise its voice. Adrian Bellini stood near the fireplace, a tall white man with silver at his temples, cold blue eyes, and the stillness of someone who had trained the world not to waste his time. Beside him stood his fiancée, Vivian Hart, elegant and smiling, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve. On her finger was the ring. Clara saw it when Vivian reached for a glass of champagne. A diamond framed in platinum, beautiful enough to make people stare, but that was not what stopped Clara's breath. Inside the stone, just below the left edge, ran a tiny crescent-shaped fracture. Clara had seen that mark before, in a photograph her mother had hidden inside a Bible, in an evidence folder that was never supposed to exist, on the hand of Elena Bellini, Adrian's first wife, the woman the newspapers said had taken her own life 7 years earlier. Clara's mother had been Elena's private nurse. Clara's mother had also died after leaving one final message that still lived in Clara's phone like a ghost. "If anything happens to me, look for the ring." And now the ring was here, sparkling on another woman's hand, in the same room where everyone was preparing to celebrate a new beginning built on an old lie. Clara moved through the crowd with the tray, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her wrists. A guest snapped his fingers without looking at her. Another laughed when he called her sweetheart instead of her name. Vivian spilled a few drops of champagne near Clara's shoes and smiled, as if kindness were too expensive to spend. "Careful," Vivian said, her voice light enough for nearby guests to hear. Good help is hard to find, but replaceable. Laughter floated over Clara like cold air. She knelt to wipe the spill, and in the mirrored shine of the marble floor, she saw the ring again. The crescent crack. The proof. When Adrian lifted his glass to begin the toast, Clara stood. Marcus Vale, the Bellini family attorney, noticed her first. His smile did not move, but his eyes warned her to disappear. Clara did not. She stepped close enough to pour for Adrian, close enough that only he could hear, close enough to risk everything her mother had died trying to protect. Then she whispered the sentence that turned the most powerful man in Boston pale. "Sir?" Elena was still wearing that ring when they pulled her from the water. The music kept playing. The guests kept smiling. But Adrian Bellini did not move. And for the first time that night, the maid was the only person in the room who knew exactly why. 3 months earlier, Clara Johnson had stood outside the Bellini mansion with a folded employment form in her purse and a voicemail from her dead mother saved under the name, "Do Not Delete." The house rose above the hill outside Boston like something that had been built to keep ordinary people at a distance. All pale stone, black iron gates, trimmed hedges, and windows that reflected the gray Massachusetts sky without letting anyone see in. Clara wore her only black dress shoes, polished until the cracked leather tried to look new, and a simple navy coat that was too thin for the March wind coming off the harbor. She had told the agency she needed steady work. That was true. Rent in Roxbury did not wait for grief, and neither did the small bills that gathered on her kitchen table like quiet accusations. But money was not the reason she had accepted a housekeeping position in the home of Adrian Bellini. The reason was buried in her phone, in her mother's final message, in a sentence that had followed Clara into every sleepless night. If anything happens to me, look for the ring. Her mother, Denise Johnson, had been a private nurse for Elena Bellini during the last year of Elena's life. Denise had never spoken carelessly about her patients. She believed dignity meant guarding the suffering of others, even when no one was watching. But in the final weeks before the apartment fire that took her life, Denise had changed. She locked her filing cabinet. She checked the hallway before answering calls. She told Clara not to trust official reports written too quickly by men with too much influence. Then came the voicemail at 2:17 in the morning, breathless and shaking, followed by silence. The police called it a tragic electrical accident. The landlord replaced the door. The city moved on. Clara did not. She had studied forensic nursing for 2 years before money forced her to withdraw, long enough to know that bodies told stories, that medication left traces, that the smallest detail could break open the largest lie. So when the agency mentioned the Bellini estate needed a maid who could work quietly and ask no questions, Clara heard her mother's warning as clearly as if Denise were standing beside her. On her first day, Mrs. Whitaker, the house manager, walked Clara through polished hallways that smelled of lemon oil and old wealth. "You will not enter Mr. Bellini's private study unless assigned," she said. "You will not touch locked cabinets. You will not speak to guests unless spoken to. And you will not mention the first Mrs. Bellini. Ever." Clara nodded at each rule with the obedient stillness people expected from women who needed their jobs. In the laundry room, she was given gray sheets to fold, white shirts to steam, and staff stairs to use so the family would not have to see her unless they required service. By the second week, she knew which floorboards creaked outside the east wing, which security cameras turned every 12 seconds, which housekeepers were kind, and which ones repeated everything to Marcus Vale. Marcus was always there. The family attorney moved through the mansion like a man who owned every secret inside it. He had smooth blonde hair, careful suits, and a voice that never sounded hurried. Staff lowered their eyes when he passed. Even Mrs. Whitaker, who feared almost nothing, became smaller when Marcus entered a room. Clara noticed that he kept the keys to Elena's sealed sitting room. She noticed that he corrected anyone who said Elena's name with too much sadness. She noticed that whenever Adrian walked past the closed white door at the end of the second-floor hall, his face turned hard, as if grief had frozen there and never melted. Adrian himself barely looked at Clara. To him, she was part of the background, hands placing coffee on a tray, footsteps retreating before a meeting began, a shadow moving behind clean glass. That invisibility protected her. It let her listen. It let her learn. It let her search without appearing to search. Each night, after taking the bus back to Roxbury, Clara replayed her mother's message in her small kitchen while the refrigerator hummed and the city lights blinked outside the window. She would close her eyes and hear the fear under Denise's words, but also the command. Look for the ring. Not the file. Not the letter. Not the money. The ring. Clara did not know what it meant yet. She only knew her mother had died believing it mattered. And in the Bellini mansion, where every portrait watched from the walls and every locked door seemed to hold its breath, Clara Johnson began to understand that some truths were not hidden because they were gone. They were hidden because someone powerful was still afraid of them. By the third month, Clara had learned that the Bellini mansion did not run on money alone. It ran on silence. Every morning began before sunrise, when the kitchen lights clicked on and the staff moved through the lower level in soft shoes, preparing fresh coffee, linen napkins, silver trays, and rooms so perfect they looked untouched by human hands. Above them, Adrian Bellini's world waited behind carved doors and tinted glass. He was always awake before the city seemed to be, standing in his private office with the Boston skyline dim beyond the windows, reading papers that men twice his age were afraid to question. Clara saw him most often from a distance, a tall white man in tailored suits, his face composed, his blue eyes cool, his voice low enough that people leaned in instead of asking him to repeat himself. He did not need to shout. The room changed when he entered. Conversations shortened. Shoulders straightened. Even the grandfather clock in the West Hall seemed louder after he passed. To the newspapers, he was a businessman with shipping interests, private security contracts, and old family money. To the people who worked under his roof, he was something simpler and more dangerous. A man no one interrupted unless they were ready to live with the consequences. Yet Clara noticed the details other people missed. Adrian never sat with his back to a door. He never drank from a glass he had not watched being poured. He never smiled when Vivian Hart touched his arm in public, though he allowed it because the engagement suited the image Marcus Vale had been shaping for months. Vivian was Boston polished from head to toe, blonde hair smooth as magazine paper, pearls at breakfast, soft laughter at dinner, charity board manners, and eyes that measured everything. She treated the staff with the gentle cruelty of someone who had never had to wonder whether a paycheck would clear. When she wanted tea, she did not ask Clara. She lifted one finger. When she passed a mirror, she paused long enough to admire the life she believed she had earned. Marcus Vale was different. Vivian wanted to be seen. Marcus wanted to be trusted. He arrived at the mansion each day in dark suits and quiet shoes, carrying leather folders against his chest, his expression pleasant enough to make suspicion look rude. He called Adrian my friend in front of guests and Mr. Bellini in front of staff. He spoke to Clara with the false warmth of a man testing whether the lock on a door still worked. "Settling in well, Miss Johnson?" he asked once while she dusted the hall outside Elena's sealed sitting room. Clara kept her eyes on the cloth in her hand. "Yes, sir." Marcus smiled. "Good. This house rewards people who understand boundaries." The words were polite. The warning underneath was not. After that, Clara became even quieter. She folded towels until her fingers ached. She polished brass handles that no guest would ever notice. She carried trays through rooms where men discussed contracts, land, judges, unions, and debts in voices softened by oak walls. She learned that Marcus controlled the archive room near the east stairwell. She learned that old family records were being moved in sealed boxes before the engagement announcement. She learned that every photograph of Elena had been removed from the main floor except one oil portrait in a hallway no guests used. Sometimes, when the house was empty enough, Clara would pause beneath it. Elena Bellini had dark hair, serious eyes, and a sadness in her painted mouth that made her look as if she had known the ending before anyone else did. Clara wondered whether her mother had stood in that same hallway, holding a medical bag, already afraid. Then came the afternoon before the party, when Mrs. Whitaker assigned Clara to the second-floor guest wing. Vivian's dress fittings had left ribbons, tissue paper, and garment boxes scattered across the bedroom suite. Clara was gathering the trash when she saw a small velvet ring case open on the vanity. It was empty, but inside the lid was the faded imprint of a jeweler's mark. Ashford & Sons, Beacon Hill. Her breath caught. That same name appeared on the back of the photograph her mother had hidden in the Bible. Clara reached toward the case, then stopped when footsteps sounded in the hall. Marcus entered without knocking. For 1 second, his eyes dropped to the velvet box. Then he looked at Clara. The air went still. "Miss Johnson," he said softly, "some objects in this house carry grief. It is best not to touch grief that does not belong to you." Clara lowered her hand. "I was only cleaning, sir." Marcus held her gaze a moment too long. "Of course you were." He took the ring case, closed it, and slipped it into his jacket pocket as if he had just removed a match from dry grass. That night, Clara sat alone in the staff room with her mother's voicemail playing against her ear. "Look for the ring." The words no longer felt like a mystery. They felt like a door beginning to open. And somewhere upstairs, behind chandeliers and locked cabinets, the people who thought Clara saw nothing were preparing to put the proof on display. The night of the engagement party turned the Bellini mansion into a theater of polished cruelty. By 6 o'clock, the staff corridors were warm with steam from pressed linens, the kitchen smelled of roasted herbs and butter, and the grand ballroom glowed beneath 5,000 crystal drops of chandelier light. Outside, black cars rolled up the driveway in a steady line, headlights sliding over the wet stone after a brief evening rain. Inside, Clara Johnson tied her apron, checked the tray assignment taped beside the pantry door, and told herself to breathe. She had spent 3 months moving like a shadow through this house. But tonight, every secret seemed awake. Marcus Vale had been everywhere since morning, adjusting seating cards, inspecting the guest list, speaking quietly with security, and watching the staff with a smile that never reached his eyes. Vivian Hart arrived from the upstairs suite just before the first guests entered, wearing an ivory dress that made people pause mid-sentence. On her left hand, the diamond ring caught the light again and again, flashing like a signal meant for Clara alone. The crescent fracture inside the stone was small, almost invisible unless someone already knew to look for it. Clara knew. Her mother had taught her that evidence did not disappear simply because powerful people renamed it. It waited. It reflected. It returned at the right angle. Clara carried champagne through the ballroom as guests filled the marble space with laughter soft enough to sound expensive. Senators' wives, shipping executives, retired judges, charity board members, and men with quiet reputations stood beneath oil paintings and spoke as if the world outside the gates existed only to serve them. No one asked Clara her name. A woman in emerald silk lifted an empty glass without turning her head. A man near the fireplace waved 2 fingers and said, "Over here, sweetheart." Clara served them both with a steady hand. She had learned long ago that humiliation often arrived dressed as politeness. Near the center of the room, Adrian Bellini stood beside Vivian, tall, controlled, and unreadable. His white dinner jacket made him look colder under the gold light, like marble carved into the shape of a man. People approached him with smiles that trembled at the edges. Vivian accepted congratulations with practiced grace, raising her ring so everyone could admire it. Each time the diamond turned, Clara felt the old photograph in her memory sharpen. Elena Bellini's pale hand, the same ring, the same hidden crack, the same impossible question. Then it happened. A young woman in silver heels brushed against Clara's tray while laughing at something a man had said. One glass tipped. Champagne spilled across the marble near Vivian's feet. The room did not stop, but the people closest to them looked down. Vivian's smile held. "Oh dear," she said, her voice light and clear. "We cannot have that during the toast." Clara reached for a linen cloth from her apron. "I am sorry, ma'am." "Of course you are," Vivian replied, still smiling. "But sorry does not clean floors." A few guests chuckled. Heat rose into Clara's face, but she lowered herself to the marble and began to wipe the spill. The floor was cold against her knees. The cloth soaked quickly. Above her, perfume, silk, and laughter moved in a circle that did not include her. Someone murmured, "They should train them better before events like this." Another voice answered, "Good help is nearly impossible to find now." Vivian took half a step closer, placing the ringed hand just inches from Clara's face as she steadied herself on a chair. "Careful," she said softly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Good help is hard to find, but replaceable." The laughter came again, small and polished, more painful because it did not sound cruel to the people making it. Clara kept wiping. Her fingers tightened around the damp cloth. In the shining reflection of the marble, the diamond hovered above her like a star caught in dirty water. The crescent fracture appeared perfectly, bright under the chandelier. For one breath, Clara was no longer in the ballroom. She was back in her mother's kitchen, watching Denise Johnson slide an old photograph across the table with trembling hands, whispering that some wounds were hidden in plain sight. Clara looked up. Vivian was still smiling. Marcus Vale stood behind Adrian, his gaze fixed on Clara with sudden, silent warning. Adrian lifted his glass, preparing to speak. The quartet softened. The guests turned toward him. Clara rose slowly from the floor, the wet cloth still in her hand, and understood that if she stayed silent now, her mother's last words would become another secret buried under marble. Clara rose from the marble floor with the damp cloth folded once in her hand, and the ballroom seemed to tilt around her. Adrian Bellini had begun to lift his glass, and every face turned toward him with the obedient attention powerful men receive before they even speak. The quartet softened into a thread of music. Vivian stood beside him, smiling for the room, the ring resting on her finger like a polished lie. Marcus Vale shifted near Adrian's shoulder, close enough to guide the evening, close enough to stop anything that threatened the story he had spent years protecting. Clara felt his eyes on her. She felt the warning in them. "Go back to the kitchen. Lower your head. Remember your place." For 1 second, Fear moved through her so sharply that her knees almost weakened. She thought of her rent notice folded in the drawer of her small apartment. She thought of Mrs. Whitaker's voice explaining that Bellini employees did not survive mistakes. She thought of the police report that had reduced her mother's life to faulty wiring and smoke damage. Then she thought of Denise Johnson's hands, strong from years of caring for patients no one else had patience for, holding that hidden photograph under the kitchen light. Look for the ring. Clara placed the wet cloth on a passing service tray and picked up a fresh flute of champagne. Her hand did not shake. That surprised her. She moved forward, each step measured, each breath quiet, the black fabric of her uniform brushing against her legs. A guest tried to take the glass from her tray, but Clara kept walking. Marcus's smile tightened. "Miss Johnson," he said softly, almost pleasantly. Adrian paused with his glass halfway raised. Vivian's eyes flicked toward Clara, irritated now, no longer amused. "Is there a problem?" Vivian asked. Clara did not answer her. She stepped beside Adrian as if she were only replacing his untouched drink, the harmless act of a servant correcting the table before a toast. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedar soap and cold winter air. His face was calm, but Clara could see the fatigue around his eyes, the old grief sealed beneath discipline. He was a man surrounded by people and still completely alone. Clara lowered the new glass onto the table near his hand, leaned just enough that her voice could reach him and no one else, and gave her mother's truth its first breath in 7 years. "Mr. Bellini, Elena was still wearing that ring when they pulled her from the water." The effect was immediate. Adrian did not turn at first. He simply stopped. His fingers closed around the stem of his glass until the crystal made a small, strained sound. The color left his face so completely that for a moment he looked less like a man carved from marble and more like one who had been struck by memory. The room did not understand what had happened. The guests saw only a maid speaking out of turn, a host frozen before a toast, a fiancé's smile fading by inches. But Marcus understood. Clara saw it in the tiny break of his expression, the first true thing his face had shown all night. His eyes sharpened, then moved to Vivian's ring. Vivian lowered her hand as if suddenly aware the diamond had become dangerous. Adrian turned his head slowly toward Clara. His voice, when it came, was low enough that it did not disturb the music, but it carried a coldness that made the nearest guests stop breathing. "What did you say?" Clara held his gaze. For 3 months, she had avoided looking directly at him. "Not now. Your wife was wearing that ring when her body was recovered," she said, still quiet. "But the official report says it was missing before she died." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That detail was never public." "No, sir," Clara said. "It was not." Marcus stepped forward at once. "Adrian, she is confused. This is not the time." Adrian lifted one hand without looking at him, and Marcus fell silent mid-word. The gesture was small. The power behind it was not. The ballroom began to quiet in spreading circles, laughter dying first near the fireplace, then by the windows, then beneath the chandelier. Vivian tried to laugh, but the sound came out too thin. "Darling, surely you are not going to let a maid interrupt our engagement toast." Clara felt the insult land, but Adrian did not even glance at Vivian. His eyes stayed on Clara, searching her face with a focus so sharp it felt like standing under bright light. "Who are you?" he asked. Clara swallowed once. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, no longer afraid, only waiting. "My name is Clara Johnson," she said. "Denise Johnson was my mother." The last name changed Adrian's expression again. Not recognition at first. Something worse. A memory unlocking. His hand lowered from the glass. The room had gone completely still. Marcus's face turned pale now, too, but not with grief. With calculation. Clara saw him prepare another lie before he spoke it. And for the first time since she had entered the Bellini mansion, she realized the truth had not made her smaller. It had made every powerful person in the room afraid to move. The name Denise Johnson moved through the ballroom like a door opening in a house everyone thought was empty. Adrian Bellini stared at Clara as if the past had just stepped out from behind her uniform. For years, he had trained his face not to change in front of enemies, friends, judges, bankers, and family. But that name reached something his discipline could not cover. Denise Johnson, Elena's nurse. The quiet woman who had once stood outside his study with a medical file pressed to her chest, asking for 5 minutes he had been too proud, too angry, and too surrounded by the wrong people to give her. Marcus Vale recovered first. He gave a small, careful laugh, the kind designed to make everyone else feel foolish for being concerned. Adrian, this is exactly why staff should not be allowed near private family matters. Miss Johnson's mother was dismissed from this home under troubling circumstances. There were questions about medication, missing records, emotional instability. It was handled quietly out of respect. Clara felt the old accusation strike the room before she could answer. Faces shifted. Sympathy became suspicion. A few guests looked at her hands, as if poverty itself might leave evidence on the skin. Vivian drew closer to Adrian, her smile returning in a thinner, sharper form. "This is awful," she said gently. "The poor woman is clearly carrying some family resentment. We should not embarrass her further." Clara stood alone beneath the chandelier, surrounded by people waiting for her to shrink. She knew this moment. She had lived inside versions of it her entire life. The polite doubt, the lowered expectations, the way educated voices could make a black woman's truth sound like noise. Her throat tightened, but she did not step back. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her. "Was your mother dismissed?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Clara said. 2 days after she asked to speak with you alone." Marcus's expression hardened for half a second. Clara saw it and kept going. She was accused of taking sedatives from Elena's medical cabinet. The accusation ruined her nursing license. But my mother did not steal medication. She found medication where it should not have been. A murmur passed through the guests. Marcus cut in, smoother now, more dangerous because he sounded reasonable. "A maid repeating a dead woman's grievance does not make it true." Clara turned to him at last. "No, sir. But records do." The room settled into silence again. Adrian's voice dropped. "What records?" Clara breathed in slowly. She could feel every eye on her, but the fear had changed shape. It was no longer stopping her. It was sharpening her. "My mother kept a copy of Elena's blood work from the week she died. It showed a high level of prescription sedative in her system, enough to make climbing over a balcony railing almost impossible without help. She also kept a photograph of Elena's hand from the recovery site. The ring was there. The report says it was not." Vivian's hand folded closed over the diamond. Marcus noticed too late. Adrian noticed immediately. His eyes moved to Vivian's fist, then back to Clara. "Where are these records?" he asked. Marcus stepped forward. "Adrian, listen to yourself. You are allowing a household employee to turn an engagement party into a circus." This time Adrian looked at him, and the temperature of the room seemed to fall. "Do not call her that again." Marcus stopped. 3 words, quietly spoken, and everyone understood the line had moved. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. Not safety. Not yet. But recognition. Adrian turned back to her. "Where?" Clara looked toward the service hallway, toward the lower level no guest had ever entered, toward the laundry room where her mother had once helped another woman hide the truth in plain sight. Behind the old dryer wall, Clara said, "My mother left it where no one with power would think to look." For a moment, no one spoke. The music had stopped without anyone noticing. Then Adrian set his glass on the table, untouched. "Lock the front doors," he said calmly. "No one leaves until Miss Johnson shows me what her mother died trying to protect." Adrian Bellini did not raise his voice after he gave the order. He did not need to. 2 men near the entrance moved at once, closing the tall front doors with a deep wooden sound that rolled through the ballroom and settled into the bones of every guest. No one screamed. No one rushed. The powerful rarely panic loudly. They look for someone else to tell them what the new rules are. Tonight, those rules had changed because a maid in a black uniform had spoken a name the room had tried to bury. Clara walked toward the service hallway with Adrian beside her, not behind her, not ahead of her, but beside her. That detail did not go unnoticed. Marcus Vale followed several steps back, his polished shoes silent on the marble, his face composed again except for the tightness around his mouth. Vivian came too, her left hand still closed around the ring as if she could hide a diamond by wanting hard enough. Mrs. Whitaker stood frozen near the pantry door while the party guests watched from the ballroom entrance, their champagne forgotten, their judgments suspended in midair. The lower level of the mansion was warmer, narrower, less forgiving. Here there were no chandeliers, only fluorescent lights humming above shelves of folded linens and industrial cleaning supplies. The air smelled of detergent, steam, and old brick. Clara had spent hours down here with aching feet, while laughter floated down from rooms she was paid to polish but never belong in. Now Adrian Bellini, a man who could command boardrooms, banks, and entire streets with a phone call, followed her past the laundry carts into the place where no guest would ever think to search for truth. Clara stopped in front of the oldest dryer, a heavy white machine pushed against the far wall. "This one has not worked since before I was hired," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her, steady but distant, as if her mother were speaking through the fear. "The wall behind it is newer than the others." Adrian looked once at the machine. "Move it." Two staff members stepped forward, but Clara raised a hand. "Please," she said. "I know where." Adrian nodded. That small permission changed the room more than any shout could have. Clara knelt, pressed her fingers beneath a loose strip of baseboard, and pulled. The wood resisted, then came free with a soft crack. Behind it was a narrow gap in the wall, just wide enough for a hand. For a second, Clara could not move. 3 months of searching, years of grief, her mother's final message. All of it had led to this dark little space behind a broken dryer. Then she reached in and touched plastic. She drew out a sealed envelope wrapped in clear freezer bags, yellowed at the edges but dry. Denise Johnson's handwriting was on the front. "For Clara, if they make me disappear with paperwork." Clara closed her eyes. The laundry room blurred. Adrian said nothing. Even Marcus did not speak. Clara opened the outer wrapping with careful fingers and pulled out the contents one by one. A copy of Elena Bellini's blood work, dated 5 days before her death. A printed photograph of Elena's hand wearing the diamond ring with the crescent crack. A pharmacy receipt for sedatives filled under a name Elena had never used. And a folded letter written by Denise in blue ink. Adrian took the photograph first. His face changed before he could stop it. Not with rage, not with suspicion, but with pain so quiet it seemed to empty the room. "She had it on," he whispered. Clara nodded. "Yes, sir." He turned to Vivian. Her hand opened slowly. The same ring flashed under the laundry room lights, suddenly stripped of beauty. Marcus stepped forward. "This proves nothing except that an unstable nurse kept private materials she had no right to possess." Clara unfolded the letter. "My mother knew you would say that." Her voice did not shake now. So she wrote down who requested the second sedative prescription, who asked her to alter Elena's evening medication log, who told her Adrian would never believe a nurse over his own attorney. Adrian looked at Marcus. Marcus did not look away, but something behind his eyes had begun to calculate exits. Clara read the final line softly. "If I am gone, ask Marcus Vale why Vivian Hart had Elena's ring before the funeral." The humming fluorescent light filled the silence. Vivian's breath caught. Marcus's expression finally broke. Adrian lowered the photograph to his side, and when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. "Take us back upstairs." Clara stood, holding her mother's letter like a torch that did not need flame. And behind her, the most powerful man in Boston followed the truth out of the laundry room. When Clara stepped back into the ballroom, the chandelier light felt different. It no longer softened the room. It exposed it. Every guest turned as she entered with Adrian Bellini at her side, Denise Johnson's letter in her hand, and the sealed evidence packet tucked beneath Adrian's arm. Marcus Vale followed behind them, his composure rebuilt into something thin and glass-like. Vivian walked last, the diamond ring no longer displayed proudly but hidden against her palm, as if the weight of it had become too much to carry. The ballroom that had laughed at Clara less than 20 minutes earlier now watched her in complete silence. The champagne spill had dried on the marble, leaving a faint dull mark near the place where she had been made to kneel. Adrian noticed it. Clara saw his eyes pause there for the briefest second before he moved to the center of the room. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He placed the photograph, the blood work, the pharmacy receipt, and Denise's letter on the long table meant for the engagement toast. The same table covered in white roses and crystal glasses. The same table where Vivian had expected to be celebrated. Adrian looked out at the guests, and for the first time that evening, his face showed no performance at all. "For 7 years," he said, "I mourned a story I was given by people I trusted." No one moved. A retired judge near the front lowered his eyes. A charity board member pressed one hand to her mouth. Vivian opened hers, but Adrian turned toward her before she could speak. "Take off the ring." The words were quiet. They landed harder than any shout. Vivian's face trembled beneath its careful makeup. Adrian, please. You cannot believe this. That nurse hated this family. This girl is using her mother's bitterness to humiliate me. Clara stood still. The old version of her might have looked down. The old version might have tried to disappear from the sharp edge of a rich woman's accusation. But not now. Not with her mother's handwriting resting in the light. Adrian did not look at Clara for permission. He looked at the evidence. The ring was photographed on Elena's hand after her death, he said. The report claimed it was missing. You are wearing it tonight. Vivian's fingers shook as she removed it. The diamond clicked softly when she set it on the table. That tiny sound seemed to travel through every corner of the room. Marcus stepped in with his last weapon, reason spoken in a lawyer's voice. Adrian, documents can be misunderstood. Photographs can be taken out of context. Before you destroy reputations in front of witnesses, I strongly suggest we discuss this privately. Adrian turned to him. You had privacy for 7 years. Marcus went still. Adrian lifted Denise's letter, but he did not read the whole thing aloud. He did not need to. My investigator will deliver every piece of this to the Suffolk County District Attorney before midnight. The medical board will receive Denise Johnson's file. The state police will receive the altered report. And every person in this room has now seen the ring. A murmur rose and died immediately. This was not the justice the room expected from a man with Adrian Bellini's reputation. There was no spectacle, no threat, just records, witnesses, names, and doors closing one by one. Marcus's pleasant mask finally cracked. You would trust her over me? Adrian looked at Clara then, and the silence changed again. She told me the truth when it would have cost her everything, he said. You sold me a lie because you thought grief made me blind. Vivian began to cry softly, but no one moved to comfort her. Marcus glanced toward the side entrance, where 2 men now stood without touching him, simply existing between him and escape. Adrian spoke to them without taking his eyes off Marcus. Make sure Mr. Vale remains comfortable until the authorities arrive. The word comfortable was colder than anger. Then Adrian turned to the room, to the guests who had laughed, whispered, judged, and looked away. This party is over. Chairs shifted. Glasses were set down untouched. One by one, the powerful people of Boston began to leave under the gaze of the maid they had dismissed. Clara remained near the table, her mother's letter pressed to her chest. Adrian walked to the dried champagne mark on the marble and stopped beside it. Miss Johnson, he said, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. I am sorry for what happened in my house. Clara looked at him, then at the emptying ballroom, then at the ring lying exposed among the flowers. Do not apologize with words, sir, she said quietly. Use the truth. Adrian nodded once. And in that silent nod, everyone left in the room understood that the woman they had treated like a shadow had just forced an empire to step into the light. By sunrise, the Bellini mansion looked almost innocent. Pale light moved across the marble floors, touching the dried champagne mark, the empty ballroom, the white roses left wilting in their crystal bowls. The music stands were gone. The guests were gone. Marcus Vale and Vivian Hart were gone too, not into whispers or private protection, but into the hands of people who would ask questions under oath. For the first time in 7 years, Elena Bellini's name was written on official documents again, not as a closed tragedy, but as a truth reopened. Clara Johnson sat alone in the staff kitchen with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had not yet tasted. Her uniform was still on. Her feet ached. Her eyes burned from a night without sleep. But the house around her felt different, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Mrs. Whitaker came in just after 6, stopped at the doorway, and looked at Clara for a long moment. The older woman had given orders in this house for more than 20 years, had watched staff come and go, had survived by never standing too close to anyone else's sorrow. Now her face softened. Your mother, she said quietly, was a good woman. Clara looked down at the mug. Those 5 words nearly broke her more than all the cruelty of the night before. She tried to be, Clara said. No, Mrs. Whitaker answered. She was. Later that morning, Adrian Bellini found Clara in the laundry room, standing before the broken dryer with the loose baseboard resting against the wall. The evidence had already been copied, sealed, and sent out. Denise Johnson's letter was in a protective sleeve. Elena's ring was locked in a transparent evidence box on Adrian's desk. He stood in the doorway without his jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled to the wrist, his face older in daylight. For a while, neither of them spoke. The humming machines filled the silence. Then Adrian said, "I never gave your mother the 5 minutes she asked for." Clara turned. "No, sir, you did not." He accepted the answer without defense. That mattered. Powerful men were used to explanations arriving before guilt could settle. Adrian offered none. "I cannot undo that," he said. "But I can make sure the world knows what was done to her." Clara studied him carefully. She had spent months watching men in expensive suits turn regret into performance. This did not feel like performance. It felt heavier. "My mother does not need a statue," Clara said. "She needs her name cleared." Adrian nodded. "Then, that is where we begin." Within a week, Denise Johnson's nursing license was publicly restored. The false accusation was withdrawn. The medical board issued a statement acknowledging that she had acted to preserve evidence. The newspaper that had once printed a cold little paragraph about an electrical accident printed her photograph beside the words, "Nurse who tried to expose the truth." Clara bought 3 copies and placed one beside her mother's Bible. Adrian also established the Denise Johnson Legal Defense Fund, not with a gala, not with smiling photographs, but with a signed commitment to help nurses, housekeepers, drivers, aides, janitors, and domestic workers who were silenced by people with money and titles. Clara agreed to serve on its advisory board only after Adrian changed the staff dining rules in his own house first. No more eating in the laundry room. No more separate cups. No more being called by anything except a person's name. On Clara's last day as a maid, she walked through the grand ballroom in her own blue dress, carrying no tray, lowering her eyes for no one. The champagne mark had been polished away, but she still knew exactly where it had been. Adrian stood near the fireplace as she passed. This time, he stepped aside for her. Clara paused beneath the chandelier, feeling the morning light warm her face. She had not come to be rescued. She had come carrying her mother's unfinished truth, and she had placed it where an entire room had to see it. And that day, dignity did not shout. It whispered, and the whole empire listened.